In the grand kingdom of Persia, where golden palaces touched the sky and the streets bustled with merchants from distant lands, a great banquet was underway. King Xerxes, ruler of the vast empire, had thrown a feast like no other. The halls glittered with precious stones, and the aroma of the finest foods filled the air. Laughter echoed as nobles and officials from all over the land celebrated in luxury. But in another part of the palace, Queen Vashti was hosting her own feast for the women of the kingdom. She was beautiful, proud, and regal. That night, in the midst of his celebration, King Xerxes, feeling triumphant, commanded his servants, "Bring Queen Vashti before me, so that all may see her beauty." But to everyone's shock, Vashti refused. A queen, defying the king. Gasps filled the court. The music stopped. The celebration froze. Humiliated and furious, Xerxes turned to his advisors. "What must be done to Vashti for this insult?" he demanded. The royal counselors, fearing that Vashti's defiance would inspire other women to rebel, advised the king to remove her. And so, with a heavy heart, King Xerxes issued a decree: Queen Vashti was banished. Persia needed a new queen. News spread across the kingdom like wildfire. A royal search was declared. The most beautiful young women in the land would be brought to the palace. Among them was a young Jewish girl named Hadassah, also known as Esther. She was no noble woman, no daughter of the elite, just a simple girl raised by her cousin Mordecai, a kind and wise man who served at the king's gate. "Go, Esther," Mordecai told her one evening, standing beneath the glow of an oil lamp. "This is a chance, a divine opportunity. But listen to me carefully, do not reveal that you are Jewish." With faith in her heart, Esther obeyed. She entered the royal courts along with many other young women. They were given months of preparation, baths in perfumed oils, fine clothing, and beauty treatments. Day by day, Esther's gentle spirit and grace caught the attention of the palace attendants. She was kind, humble, and full of wisdom beyond her years. Soon, she found favor in the eyes of Haggai, the chief eunuch, who quickly placed her under special care. He gave her the best place in the palace, the finest foods, and 7 maids to serve her. But the real moment of truth was yet to come. One by one, the young women were presented before King Xerxes. Each dressed in their finest garments, each hoping to be chosen. And then, it was Esther's turn. She walked into the royal chamber, clothed in elegance but carrying something far more powerful than gold or silk, a heart full of grace, wisdom, and humility. The moment the king laid eyes on her, he was captivated. This is the one, Xerxes declared. And so, a simple Jewish girl, an orphan raised in a foreign land, became Queen of Persia. But little did she know, this was just the beginning of her story. A great trial was coming, and her courage would be tested in ways she never imagined. The kingdom of Persia was vast, its power stretching far and wide, yet inside the walls of the palace in Susa, whispers of betrayal stirred in the shadows. Esther, now queen, had settled into her new life in the royal courts. Draped in fine garments and adorned with dazzling jewels, she looked the part of a queen, but inside, she remained the same humble Jewish girl Mordecai had raised. Though she now lived in luxury, she had not forgotten her people, or the man who had always protected her. Mordecai, her cousin and guardian, continued his daily routine. He could not see Esther freely anymore, but each day, he positioned himself at the king's gate, keeping an ear to the happenings of the palace. He watched the comings and goings of officials, overheard conversations, and remained ever vigilant. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light on the marble walls of the city, Mordecai overheard something chilling. 2 palace guards, Bigthana and Teresh, stood in the shadows of the gate, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Bigthana, his face twisted with anger, clenched his fists. "The king grows weaker every day," he muttered. Teresh sneered. "He sits on a throne of power, yet he is blind to the enemies within his own court." Mordecai slowed his steps, his heart pounding. He turned slightly to listen more carefully. Bigthana lowered his voice. "It's time someone takes action. The king's days are numbered." A lump formed in Mordecai's throat. This was no ordinary frustration, this was treason. The realization struck him hard: they were planning to assassinate King Xerxes. Mordecai felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He was a foreigner in this land. What business was it of his to protect a Persian king? Would they even believe him? But then, he thought of Esther, how God had placed her in the palace, how every event had unfolded with divine purpose. If the king was murdered, who knew what would happen to her? Mordecai acted swiftly. He found a trusted palace servant and sent a message directly to Queen Esther. Inside her royal chambers, Esther sat among her attendants when the urgent message arrived. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the words, "A plot against the king's life." Her mind raced. If she did nothing, the kingdom could fall into chaos. If the king were killed, his enemies could take the throne. What would that mean for her people? She took a deep breath and knew what she had to do. That evening, as the golden torches flickered in the grand hall, Esther approached King Xerxes. The king, dressed in his royal robes, reclined on a cushioned throne. He raised a curious brow as she knelt before him. "There is something I must tell you," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Xerxes listened as Esther revealed the plot. Every word was carefully spoken, and when she finished, a heavy silence filled the room. The king's face darkened. "Who dares plot against me?" A full-scale investigation was launched immediately. Palace officials worked through the night, questioning guards, searching chambers, and cross-examining witnesses. The truth came to light: Bigthana and Teresh were indeed guilty. Justice was swift. The traitors were executed, and their betrayal was recorded in the royal chronicles. Mordecai, however, received no reward, no recognition for his actions. His name was written in the records, but that was all. Perhaps the king had forgotten, but God had not. This act of loyalty, though unnoticed at the time, would later set in motion the events that would save an entire nation. And in the depths of the palace, another storm was brewing, a storm far greater than two traitorous guards. A man named Haman was rising to power, and his hatred burned deep. The palace of King Xerxes was alive with celebration, its golden halls echoing with the laughter of nobles, the clinking of goblets, and the whispers of ambitious men. Among them, one figure moved with an air of rising importance: Haman, the newly promoted chief official of the empire. He walked with pride, his robes flowing like a river of authority. The king had exalted him above all the other princes, and now, wherever he went, men bowed low in reverence. All but one. Mordecai, a Jew stationed at the palace gates, stood tall, his eyes steady. He neither bowed nor trembled before Haman. It wasn't defiance out of arrogance, it was conviction. He bowed only to God. At first, Haman barely noticed. But as the days passed, his servants began to murmur. "Mordecai does not bow," they whispered. "He does not obey the king's command." Haman's curiosity turned to irritation. He confronted the guards. "Why does this man refuse to bow?" They relayed Mordecai's words, their voices hushed, as if uttering something dangerous. "He is a Jew, and he bows only to his God." The moment the word Jew reached Haman's ears, something inside him ignited, not just anger, but a deep, consuming hatred. He didn't just want Mordecai punished, he wanted all of his people wiped from existence. Haman returned to his chambers that night, pacing in the dim candlelight, his mind spinning with rage. A single man had dared to defy him. Could there be others? What if all the Jews secretly disrespected him? What if they plotted against him, against the king? A plan took shape, a cruel, merciless plan. He would not just destroy one man. He would erase an entire nation. At sunrise, Haman strode into the throne room with a calculated air of urgency. King Xerxes sat upon his grand seat, draped in rich silks, sipping from a goblet of wine. Haman bowed deeply before speaking, his voice slick with deception. "O great king, there is a people among us, scattered throughout your provinces, yet set apart. They do not follow your laws. They are rebellious and dangerous. If it pleases the king, let them be removed from the land." King Xerxes leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. He trusted Haman's counsel. If these people were a threat, why should they remain? Haman saw the agreement in the king's eyes and pressed further. "I will even provide 10,000 talents of silver to fund their removal." The king, unbothered by the implications, removed his signet ring and handed it to Haman. "Do as you see fit." Haman took the ring with a wicked smirk. This was it. His moment of triumph. Without delay, he summoned the royal scribes. The decree was written in every language across the empire. On the 13th day of the 12th month, all Jews, young and old, men and women, would be annihilated. Their possessions would be plundered. Not one was to be spared. The royal messengers set out on swift horses, carrying the terrible news to every province. In marketplaces, town squares, and palace courtyards, the decree was read aloud. Panic gripped the Jewish people. Fathers held their children close, mothers wept in silence. What crime had they committed? Why this sudden sentence of death? In the heart of the city, outside the palace gates, Mordecai heard the decree and was struck with horror. He tore his robes, covered himself in sackcloth, and cried out in mourning. He walked the streets in anguish, his cries echoing through the city. "O Lord, have mercy on your people." But within the palace walls, Haman was celebrating. He raised a golden goblet, his laughter dark and triumphant. He had set a storm in motion, a storm that would shake the empire to its very core. But little did he know, the winds were already shifting against him. The days grew darker for the Jewish people in Persia. The streets that once bustled with merchants and musicians now echoed with murmurs of despair. Families clung to one another, weeping over Haman's decree, dreading the doom that awaited them. But in the palace, behind the grand golden doors, Esther sat in silence, her heart heavy. She had just received word from her most trusted servant, Mordecai, her cousin, the man who raised her, was in deep mourning outside the palace gates, dressed in sackcloth, refusing to eat. She sent fresh garments for him, hoping he would accept them, but the messenger returned, shaking his head. Mordecai would not be comforted. Curious and concerned, Esther sent word, asking what troubled him so. When the reply came, her hands trembled as she unrolled the parchment. The words were heavy with urgency. Haman had set a date for the destruction of the Jews. Their people were doomed. And then, the message from Mordecai, "You must go to the king. Beg for your people." Esther's heart pounded. Go to the king. The law was clear, anyone who approached King Xerxes uninvited could be put to death unless he extended his golden scepter. Not even the queen was exempt from this rule. And for the past 30 days, the king had not called for her. She paced in her chambers, her richly embroidered robes swaying with each step. She turned to her maidservants, who watched her anxiously. Should she risk her life? Another message came from Mordecai, this time, even more urgent. Do not think you will escape in the palace. If you remain silent, deliverance will come from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. The word struck her deeply. For such a time as this. Esther knew what she had to do. She took a deep breath, her mind made up. She turned to her maidens. Gather the Jewish people. Tell them to fast for 3 days and nights. I, too, will fast with my servants. Then I will go to the king. And if I perish, I perish. Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart raced. The next 3 days passed in solemn fasting. No bread, no water, only prayer. On the third day, Esther stood before her mirror. Gone was the hesitant girl who had once lived in the shadows of the palace. In her reflection stood a queen, determined, unwavering. She wore her most elegant royal robe, deep purple and gold, shimmering under the candlelight. She lifted her chin, took a deep breath, and stepped toward the throne room. The grand doors loomed before her, guarded by soldiers in gleaming armor. Behind them sat King Xerxes on his magnificent throne, the golden scepter resting in his hand. As she approached, every step echoed in the vast chamber. The court fell silent. Advisors, noblemen, and high-ranking officials turned, their eyes wide in shock. No one came to the king uninvited. Esther's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept walking. Would he grant her mercy? Or would this be her last moment? King Xerxes narrowed his eyes, gripping the golden scepter. The room held its breath. And then the king extended the scepter toward her. Esther let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Relief flooded her as she stepped forward, her fingers lightly touching the golden rod. Queen Esther, the king said, his voice laced with curiosity. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. The battle was far from over, but Esther had taken the first step. And she was ready. In the grand palace of Susa, the air was thick with tension. Esther stood in her chamber, her heart pounding. She was about to risk everything, her crown, her life, for her people. Clothed in her finest royal robes, she took a deep breath and stepped into the vast corridors of the palace, her golden gown shimmering under the torchlight. Beyond the towering golden doors lay the throne room, where King Xerxes held court. Guarded by spearmen in silver-plated armor, the hall was a place of absolute power. And one unbreakable law: no one may approach the king uninvited, or they would face death, unless the king extended his golden scepter. Esther's footsteps echoed as she crossed the marble floor, her hands trembling. Courtiers and nobles turned, their whispers rippling through the chamber. Would the king be pleased? Or would this be her last moment? On his grand throne of gold and ivory, King Xerxes sat with his golden crown gleaming under the torchlight. His sharp eyes fixed on Esther. Time seemed to slow. Then, he lifted his golden scepter. The room exhaled. King Xerxes spoke, his deep voice reverberating through the hall. Queen Esther, what is your request? Even up to half my kingdom, and it shall be given to you. Esther lowered her gaze, steadying her voice. If it pleases the king, I would like to invite you, and Haman, to a banquet I have prepared. At the mention of his name, Haman, the king's highest official, smirked. Clad in a deep crimson robe lined with gold, he stood tall, his beady eyes glinting with arrogance. to dine alone with the king and queen. His status had never been higher. The king agreed. And so, later that evening, under the glow of golden chandeliers, the royal banquet was set. Servants moved gracefully, pouring wine into goblets, while silver platters of exotic dishes filled the air with rich aromas. King Xerxes, pleased by the feast, turned to Esther. "Now, my queen, what is your request?" Esther smiled softly but hesitated. The moment wasn't right. She needed another banquet. "If it pleases the king, let Haman and yourself come to another banquet I shall prepare tomorrow. Then, I will answer the king's question." The king agreed once more. That night, Haman left the palace in triumph, his pride swelling. But his joy was short-lived. As he walked through the gates, he saw Mordecai, the same Jewish man who refused to bow before him. His blood boiled. That night, in his grand estate, Haman gathered his wife and closest friends. "What should be done to this Jew who disrespects me?" he snarled. His wife's voice was cold. "Build a gallows, 75 feet high. And in the morning, ask the king to hang Mordecai upon it." Haman's lips curled into a wicked smile. He had a plan. Little did he know, God had a bigger one. The palace buzzed with anticipation. Tonight, Queen Esther had invited King Xerxes and Haman to a second banquet. Haman, despite his humiliation from earlier in the day, forced himself to appear composed. He still clung to hope, believing he could regain the king's favor. Inside the grand dining hall, golden lanterns cast a warm glow over the silk-draped tables, laden with the finest delicacies. Esther, dressed in a magnificent royal blue gown, her golden crown resting gently on her head, sat across from the king. Haman, eager yet wary, took his place beside them. As the feast continued, the king leaned forward, his voice rich with curiosity. "Queen Esther, what is your request? Ask me, and it shall be granted, even up to half my kingdom." Esther took a deep breath. The moment had come. With grace and unwavering courage, she rose from her seat, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Your Majesty, if I have found favor in your sight, and if it pleases the king, I beg for my life, and the lives of my people." King Xerxes' brow furrowed. The room grew silent. "Your life. Your people." His gaze sharpened as he looked at her with concern. "Who would dare threaten my queen?" Esther turned her eyes toward Haman. "Our enemy, is this wicked Haman?" A wave of horror crashed over Haman. His face drained of color. The room spun. The king's fury ignited instantly. He rose abruptly, knocking over his goblet, his hands clenching into fists. His piercing eyes locked onto Haman, who now trembled in his seat. The tension was unbearable. The silence, deafening. King Xerxes stormed out to the palace garden, his mind racing. He had trusted Haman. Had rewarded him. And now, this man had secretly plotted to destroy the queen's people, the very people who had saved his life through Mordecai. Inside, Haman knew his fate was sealed. Desperation took over. He stumbled toward Esther, falling at her feet, pleading for mercy. At that exact moment, the king re-entered the hall. His eyes widened in fury. Will he even assault the queen in my own house? Guards rushed forward. Haman was seized. His fate was decided. One of the royal eunuchs, Harbona, stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty, there is a gallows, 75 feet high, built by Haman himself, meant for Mordecai, the man who saved your life." The king's jaw clenched. "Hang him on it." Haman's cries echoed through the halls as he was dragged away. The very structure he had built to destroy an innocent man would now bring about his own end. And so, justice was served. The shadow of wickedness lifted, and Queen Esther's bravery had saved her people. But the story wasn't over yet.